In 1845, a woman left her family home here in Ledyard, Connecticut, and set out on a journey that would forever change a nearby community. Sarah Smith, wife of Sea Captain Shubal Smith, set out alone on horseback, making the 20-mile journey to Westerly, Rhode Island in just one day. Sarah was carrying $2,000 in her saddlebag, money that she was bringing to her 31-year-old son Orlando, who needed it for a down payment on a piece of land.
His mother had been trying to get him to settle down for years, tried buying him a farm in Connecticut, another place out in Ohio, and he just wouldn't settle down. He came home, set up a small granite operation on Mechanic Street in Pawcatuck, and they made steps and foundations and hitching posts, that kind of thing. And he was looking for granite as his raw material, and he discovered an outcropping of granite over here in Westerly on Granite Street, and he wanted to buy this farm. So his mother was so thrilled he finally had a focus for his life, and shortly thereafter Orlando married Emmeline Gallup.
Smith and his new wife Emmeline had planned to move into the old Babcock home, but it was in need of repair. Using granite found on the property, Orlando and Emmeline's father, Isaac Gallup, rebuilt the foundation in the north wing and made other changes to the house. Orlando moved his masonry business from across the river to the top of Rhodes Hill in Westerly. Some of his early granite work included curbstone that was purchased by the city of Fall River and by the state of Rhode Island.
And they were building foundations for houses, steps, hitching posts, any crude thing, no monuments like we know today.
Over time, Orlando shifted his focus from masonry work, and the Smith Granite Company began to concentrate more on formal monuments. Orlando worked next to the outcropping alongside his friend William Burdick, who had expertise in granite monuments.
And they got together and they worked together, and he was the fellow that came and brought the information on how to make monuments, how to bush the stone, how to make it finish.
But their partnership ended suddenly with the death of Orlando Smith in 1859 at the age of 50. Emmeline was now faced with running a farm, raising 4 small children, and overseeing a growing business. She needed Burdick to stay on.
She knew him and asked him if he would run the business. The estate of Orlando Smith is what they called it. So all the business went through his estate. And she ran the business. She owned everything. She owned the oxen. She owned the stone, the land, the house, everything. And he managed it. And he went on to become quite a businessman.
The view today from what was once known as Quarry Hill is much different from what it was during the heyday of the granite industry. Numerous quarries opened from Westerly to Bradford in the years following Orlando's granite discovery. Quarrying was dangerous work, and muscle power was used to perform many difficult jobs.
Working in a quarry was unbelievably hard work. The men having to go down those rickety ladders and go down and then swing those implements or lift or pull or drill or whatever it was. That was gruesome labor. And then don't forget, you had all those auxiliary people. You had the young boys who carried the tools all day long to the blacksmiths and back, and the blacksmiths would be working so hard keeping those tools sharp, and the boys running back and taking them back because everybody insisted on using his own tools.
All types of Westerly granite have to be quarried in layers because of the way it was formed. Granite lies in horizontal beds or strata. The depth of the bed determines the size of the stone that will come out of it. Richard Camoli, a second-generation master carver in his own right, says finding the right area of the hole is key.
First, you got to find an area that the granite is good. And a lot of times, well, maybe 50% of the time, maybe it's a failure. It's like, and then they claim the first 2 layers in a quarry are not the best, so they have to wait until they get down to second or third layer. Because I guess waters run through and it's left like what they call sap or iron stains. So then they'll get a deeper goal, supposed to be a little bit better. And then today, you know, they got saws in quarries, so they try to take out dimension blocks, where years ago, by hand, they probably drilled 2 or 3 holes and put some powder, then it came out like an airplane, and then to get it, you wasted so much stone years ago.
Westerly granite is a fine-grained granite of uniform texture, a texture much like granulated sugar. It formed by the cooling of molten magma at a depth of 3 to 5 miles below the surface of the Earth. As the magma body cooled, it began to contract and develop prominent planar cracks called joints. Blocks of granite were quarried from these sheets or layers. The Sullivan Granite Quarry was one of the sites that employed hundreds of workers and expanded quickly to meet the growing demand for granite being used for monuments and mausoleums.
In 1907, my grandfather came to Westerly, started buying up some quarries in the Bradford area, and later on, I think in around 1940, my father started in the business, but then he had to go off to war. And after the war, he came back and he assisted my grandfather, and they were in Sullivan Granite. The Sullivan Quarry was located on Quarry Road in Bradford. He had about 700 to 800 acres of land, and then started working the holes.
Massive pieces of granite would have to be quarried to fulfill orders that came into the granite companies. Men would have to drill 50 feet below the surface to find ledges that could produce the size stone that was needed. The method chosen to free the stone was important so the stone would not crack.
Working in the granite industry was a tough life, especially to work in the wintertime when it was cold. You didn't want to be too close to the heating source in the cutting shed. You didn't want to be too far away. It was very difficult.
The men could not work out in the wintertime because the ice on the rocks and the cold of the rocks, if they were splitting or blasting, sometimes that ice in the rocks would be uncontrollable, never mind slipping on the rocks and slipping into the quarry. The only quarry where they could work all winter was the Sullivan Quarry because they had gone underneath and dug out, and so they were working underneath the overhang. Summer times had to have been hot and grueling. When you think about the sweat that must have poured off their bodies when they were in those quarries, just fantastic. And inside the sheds themselves, they were practically working on top of each other, so their chisels were chipping off these chips that flew into other people's faces, and the dust was filled. There are stories about men putting lamb's wool in their nostrils to keep from breathing the stone dust.
The men in the quarries each had different skill sets. Drillers specialized in making the drill holes to free the stone, first by hand, then by steam drills. Engineers operated the engines for the cranes and derricks that would harness the granite that could weigh over a ton.
And when we first started this business, it was muscle-powered, man or beast. And we have pictures of a line of Irishmen, they call it the Irish drill line, hammering the drills to get the granite ready to quarry. Later on, we had pneumatic tools and steam tools, but initially it was man and beast.
By 1892, more than half of the town's 7,000 residents had a connection to the granite industry and worked in the area known as Quarry Hill. Both Dr. Ellen Madison and John Kadori have family ties to the granite industry and understand the impact it had on the community back then and now.
This was a huge industry in the town of Westerly. It is the engine of the economy for so many years here in Westerly, along with the textile mills. And I think it's important for us to know where we've been so that we can know where we are and then where we're going in the future. That heritage is something that's shared by so many different ethnic groups here in Westerly, so many families.
We've been amazed at the outpouring of people who have come forward to provide us with, books and ephemera of, to tell us about how their grandfathers worked in the quarries and what it was like to actually be in the home of a granite worker. And it was a big part of Westerly, and I think it's important that people don't forget that.
Orlando Smith's discovery would change the history of the town and have a significant economic impact on the area. The transition from farm town to mill town was common throughout New England at this time, and with Smith's discovery of granite outcroppings, it assured a more diversified economy for the town and the region.
A lot of things came together at this time. They had discovered this wonderful quality of granite here in Westerly. There was a movement afoot to develop these rural cemeteries. Instead of churchyard cemeteries, there were these park-like cemeteries that were a setting for much more elaborate monuments. And as the industry developed, we had people drawn here by those two factors. And so the momentum began to build to provide a wonderful basis for about 100 years of really superb work coming out of Westerly.
A large number of the workers immigrated from across Europe to work in the mills and the quarries. Starting in the 1850s, the Irish came and often worked the drill lines.
There were several ethnic groups that worked here in the quarry industry: the Irish, the Scotch, the Italians, and the Yankees, the Finns. All of these were different ethnic groups that came and worked. There was a real hierarchy in workers.
Mr. Battison, who owned the New England Granite Works, he would go to Europe and get people to come here, workers, carvers and specialties. So and I'm quite sure the Smith Granite Company probably did the same thing. And I think that was the start of it, of the first people to get the people here to do this work. And then after, of course, you had the migration in the 1890s and probably before. And then, well, say I came and I was a carver and worked there and I had a friend back, I would say, come on over. And I think that's how it started.
And it's hard to tell from the census records, they worked for the Granite Company. Well, this could mean they did anything from quarrying to blacksmithing to granite cutting to carving statues.
Once here, they set up shop alongside the cutting sheds, and these highly skilled blacksmiths, sculptors, stone setters, and designers practiced their craft. The families settled in different areas of town, creating neighborhoods, sharing ethnic traditions, and influencing the religious development of Westerly.
At one time, 400 men worked in New England quarries, and 400 more worked in the Smith quarries, in the sheds. At the end of the day, 800 men come down off the hill. It was quite a time, and in season, that was quite a thing. and no respectable lady would be on the street till they all went by. And the Irish lived across the river in Donnerville, and of course Italian people up north, Scottish people along the side of this hill here, and the Yankees are spread around all about in them. Quite a community. And then what's interesting, we're talking granite, but right alongside of it is the religious development of the town, of the Christian religions. When it first started, there was no Catholic church here. And the first one, of course, was across the river, St. Michael's. And then the one here, the Immaculate Conception, was made with a bluestone from Smith's.
Most of the Italians settled in the north end of town, filling the neighborhood with family, music, and good food.
And then there are wonderful stories about kids bringing their lunches to their dads. And this crossed all of the ethnic groups. The thing that was different was what the men were eating. On Benefit Street, where the Scots lived anyway, those kids would get out of school and take the lunches to their fathers, and you'd have Scottish food. And then the Italians, you'd hear about the raw eggs that were brought up and eaten. Each ethnic group would bring these lunch boxes to their dads at lunchtime, and I think that's kind of nice.
As more and more families moved to the area, there was a need to educate both the immigrant and local children. Emmeline Smith deeded the town of Westerly, land on Quarry Hill, to be used for a school. Many of the boys who attended the school were also being groomed to work in the quarries.
The young boys who started to work in the quarries, and they all started as gophers, were probably about 12, 13 years old from the pictures that we've seen of them. They would start and work their way up in terms of skills. So the first thing that they would do would be to take these tools back and forth to the blacksmith, and then generally they would work their way up the ladder depending upon what they were well suited for. The really brute force that was needed to work in the quarries would be determined really by your size, I think, and the strength that you had. Then there would be an apprentice system where you would learn the craft from somebody working next to you or working beside you.
The quarries and sheds were not the only place workers honed their craft. Many utilized their skills at home for granite fireplaces, foundations, and stone walls. Carvers and cutters frequently worked on cemetery headstones and monuments for their own families, a piece of their legacy and craft that lives on today.
Everybody is proud of being a part of that granite story. And it didn't make any difference whether you supported the granite industry by making leather aprons for the people to wear who were chipping away on that stone, whether your grandfather was a shopkeeper, whether he was a teamster who owned the cattle that worked in the quarries, or whether you really truly came from a wonderful stone carving heritage. But everybody who had a connection was so proud of that connection.
I have to make a point of one thing here, because
Isaac Smith and Richard Camoli are legends of the granite industry. For generations, their families have worked with Westerly Granite, and their knowledge and love of the stone remains strong.
I'm Isaac Gallup Smith, Jr. I'm the third Isaac Gallup in the family. And now I have a great grandson named Isaac, so it's still in the family. And I've always been associated with granite people and granite companies since I was a child. And there was a man that lived down on Franklin Street, and he worked up here in Smith's on a surfacer machine. Very dusty job. And they had, went home for dinner an hour and a quarter. You had to go home and get lunch and come back to work. And he'd go by my house, and his shoes would be all white from dust, you know. And after he'd gone by, I'd scuff my feet in the dust so I'd look like Mr. Williams.
Ike Smith did get his feet dirty as a young man doing odd jobs in the quarries, like generations of Smiths before him. But his apprenticeship as a stonecutter at Smith Granite had to wait until he returned home from the war.
He has wonderful stories to tell about his apprentice days. They were going to, for one of their first stones, cut a small rectangular marker. Nothing fancy, just make it this dimension by this dimension, make it flat with square corners. And when they get to the corner, they would sometimes knock off a corner, and the foreman would have a box next to their toolbox and says, you throw that corner in there, and every time you think you're getting good, you look at that box and remember how many corners you knocked off. And it was a tough way. I mean, they didn't really care about your self-image. You learned the hard way, you know? It was a school of hard knocks.
See, I just found these up here, Dick.
Ike worked as a stonecutter until 1960 and developed a talent historians admire.
He worked at Smith Granite Company, he worked for the Joseph Kaduri Company, and he worked for the Bonham Monument Company.
Ike's friend, Richard Comolli, has developed his own talent, and his love of granite has been passed down from generation to generation. It all started in Italy.
My father came from the old country at 16 after graduating from school, sculpturing school and modeling. And we found out in later years, he was #1 in his class. But we did find out his brother-in-law was the professor in the school, so I don't know if that helped. Then I think probably in 1934-35, he came to Westerly. When he came to Westerly, I think he came to work for the Smith Granite Company. And then what steered me to the granite business, I think it was just in the bloodline.
Comolli began stone cutting at Columbia Granite Company in Westerly after he was discharged from the Army. He developed his cutting and carving skills by working alongside well-respected local carvers. And like Smith, he can tell you who carved some of Westerly's greatest monuments.
This older stone carver knew exactly this monument, that monument, who did this, who did that. Some of the finer details of the Westerly stone, how things were carved, why stone carvers of the period enjoyed carving Westerly more than they, why he didn't like Barry granite as opposed to Westerly, and that type of information. But talking to Mr. Comolli was great.
They start off with a big block of granite.
Together, these two men have witnessed what we will probably never see again. A town that was united and sustained by one industry. They are the last of a long line of granite workers that touched the stone before it came out of the ground and worked it to its final state. Westerly's Granite Men. Most people visit cemeteries to honor loved ones, but a walk through Riverbend Cemetery in Westerly with Richard Comolli is a combined art and history lesson in a place he is very comfortable in.
I can almost go in a cemetery in a new part and tell you who carved things. Every carver's got a different hand. It's like a painter. Every painter and every carver had little other techniques. The statue was out of pink granite from the old Chapman Quarry, and the red is quarried right near there. That's like the town hall, those two pieces. But that there, see, if you made it out of red, you wouldn't get the detail. That's why Westerly Granite was so important, because of the fine grain. You know, we don't see any mica in it or anything. It's almost perfect. There's a lot of delicate work on this. And you even look at the wings in here, how nice he made them. The detail he put in them. This ward cross here. The detail in this, I am amazed. The guy must have spent a year on it. My God, it's so beautiful. And of course, I appreciate it more because I see all the detail and how careful he had to be. Unbelievable. Well, you can almost see the anatomy underneath the dress. You can see the shape of the woman, you know? And this is stone you're working with. And then look at this hand, how delicate. Look at this one here, my God, unbelievable. And she's pretty. I think he did a good job on this, beautiful. Look how delicate this thing is. Look at the thing, oh my God, look at this. Don't forget he had to finish here before he went back here. Because he had to finish as he went back, because if he couldn't come out here after he did it, because he would have broke it off. You see, years ago, something like this, they probably would have made a clay model, then cast it in plaster, because the guy, when he starts, he's got a block of granite. And before he starts it, you got to make sure that it's all in there. And then you rough it all out within a ½ an inch, 3/4, before you start finishing. So everything you're doing, you're subtracting, you can't add. You know, if you take off a finger here, there's no way of putting it on. This was a beauty. This should be actually in a museum. That's like a painting. You can paint over, but this you can't. I think granite and marble sculpturing are probably the hardest form of art to make myself.
At the height of the granite era, work had transitioned from the practical to the artistic. Joseph Newell and Company, New England Granite Works, and Smith Granite were the three dominant companies operating both quarries and cutting sheds.
A quarry is obviously, a hole in the ground, and you have to work in that hole to cut and heft huge amounts of stone out of that quarry. Then those pieces of stone are brought into the cutting shed, and you take that block of granite and you just cut it down to whatever size you need. If it's just a rectangular shape that has to be cut down with a surfacing machine or a saw, wire saw system that would, shave it to the final size. And then, of course, you would have the stone, the carvers, that would do, the finished work and work on from a plaster model into the ultimate shape of the finished product.
That finished product, made of Westerly granite, was sought after for the finest monuments and headstones. Park-like cemeteries were coming into vogue, and it was the wealthy and the rich and famous that had the money to purchase them to leave a lasting legacy.
And it's just nice to leave something behind so that people know you were here. That was one of the things people often ask me, why did the industry boom? Well, we had a good quality raw material. We had a pool of wonderful craftsmen from Europe that immigrated to the United States and were drawn to Westerly because of its reputation. And the Victorian spending habits were different than they are today. Now you're looking for a home and a car that indicate your wealth status. In those days, it was the kind of memorial you did in the cemetery. And you look at some of the monuments, they're just elaborate beyond words and make a bold statement. And that was the style then.
Westerly granite's uniform color, fine grain, and its strength made it perfect for carving many of the ornate monuments and mausoleums that can be seen in places like Woodlawn Cemetery in New York.
When Woodlawn was established in 1863, we were actually Westchester County, and then we became the Bronx in 1898. Cemetery is one of the largest in the country. It's 400 acres, 310,000 people are buried here, and we became known as the place for the rich and famous during the Gilded Age. That's why we have so many of these magnificent mausoleums. We have over 1,300 private mausoleums in our collection, which is the largest in the country.
One of the finest pieces to come out of Westerly is the Dumbrall Mausoleum that was produced by the Joseph Kaduri Granite Company.
The Dumbrall Mausoleum in the Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx is probably the most elaborate because of it has huge columns. It's a domed structure. It has a Celtic cross. It has statues. It has pedestals. It has plinths. It's just massive and very elaborate. The kind of artistry that is really not capable of being duplicated today.
We had initially assumed that all our Westerly pieces were of the late 19th century, and then it was through John Kaduri who showed us some images from Kaduri Granite showing that his family tradition was to continue in the quarries and bring great things to Woodlawn. Dominic Dumbrall was the first builder in 1927. It cost, I think it was $127,000 to build this mausoleum that's worth millions today. Magnificent piece of very light granite, and that came out of Kaduri.
The Hall obelisk is one of the largest pieces to come out of the Smith Granite Company. When completed, it stood 57 feet tall, roughly the height of a 5-story building.
Just the pride that the workers took, that they did it in one piece of stone. We can't just think about the finishing. We need to think about the quarrying. And to get these matching columns out of a quarry to make somebody like Jay Gould happy was really a challenge. And with Hall, of course, we have that tremendous obelisk. But again, all those works come out of Westerly and the New England Granite Company there.
Westerly granite was known as the finest in the world. One of the reasons was because of its very fine grain that made it ideal for carving.
Westerly had 4 types of granite. The first type that really made us famous was the blue granite, and that is the type of granite that is best for statues. And the statues got us into a lot of the Civil War monuments. Another kind is the red Westerly granite, and that was quarried in the north end of town, as was the dark pink granite. This red Westerly is used more for buildings. And then there was also dark pink, and in the later years, the light pink. The light pink was very hard to cut. It did have a nice fine grain and a nice color, but it was tricky to cut. The blue was much more predictable on how it would behave.
Westerly granite had such a fine grain and such a fine density to it that people were proud to have a statue made or a cemetery marker made or a building made of Westerly granite because it was a cut above the other granites.
Quarries and workers were both plentiful during this time. People wanted granite monuments to commemorate Civil War heroes, granite headstones and mausoleums to remember loved ones, and granite to construct buildings. Westerly granite was used for all of them. This was known as the heyday of the granite era, and Westerly was attracting a lot of attention.
Here we are, a little town in the out-of-the-way corner of a little state. Who's ever heard of Westerly, Rhode Island? And when you figure between, I would say 1880 and 1930, that 50-year period, Westerly granite was the gold standard of cemetery monuments. We were very fortunate.
Smith Granite and New England Granite Works were the 2 largest operating on Quarry Hill at this time. Order books from Smith Granite Company and others provide a roadmap of the works from quarry to monument.
I have here one of the order books of the Smith Granite Company that we're very fortunate to have. And we really like these old order books rather than the ones that came in the latter part of the industry's life, because these old order books have so much information in them. This particular one that I opened to just by chance was for the Richardson Monument in Riverbend Cemetery here in Westerly. And we can see when it was ordered. We know that it's 5 pieces, and we know the name of the person that cut each of the pieces, and we know that it was shipped in November 25th, 1893.
Wealthy families wanted only the very best when it came time to remember their loved ones. They would contact salesmen from the Westerly Granite companies, which had offices in major cities like Philadelphia and New York, in order to meet those customers' needs. But it was not just grieving families who chose the monuments. Some people planned their own while they were very much alive.
This is the Jay Gould Mausoleum. It is the largest single lot at Woodlawn. In 1882, he bought 30,000 square feet because he was determined to build what at the time was the most spectacular mausoleum in New York City. So Gould buys this property knowing that he's going to commission Hamlin Q. French, who was the monument maker of the time, to design this temple for him.
Gould, of course, wanted only the best, so not only did he commission the monument makers, but he also chose to have it made out of Westerly Granite.
Gould's mausoleum is constructed of Westerly Granite. Hamlin Q. French, the company that built this, had great ties with Westerly, and so they were selling this type granite in these colors all over the country.
New England Granite Works was known as the giant on Quarry Hill. It was an unusual company because it excelled at both elaborate monumental work and major building projects.
Up on Leadwood Avenue was the New England Granite Works, and the president of that was James Batterson. And James Batterson was well connected. He was one of the movers and shakers of his time.
James Batterson was a man of many interests and a close friend of President Abraham Lincoln. His granite company was known for building elaborate granite buildings as well as fine monuments.
Batterson was very involved in Woodlawn. He was quite the political mover and shaker as well as quite the opportunist, and he was one of the first who employed really fine artists and sculptors to work in granite, which was really a remarkable thing that Batterson was able to do. But again, all those works come out of Westerly and the New England Granite Company there.
New England Granite Works order books show the diversity of the work produced by the company. A few of the prominent works are the State Capitol Building in Hartford, Connecticut, and the Travelers Insurance Building. Batterson even left his mark in Westerly.
The former Industrial Trust building in downtown Westerly is a great example of the craftsmanship and the artistry that was produced by James Batterson. It's got great examples of embedded fluted columns with Corinthian capitals. There is great carving, different examples of stone finishes. This is just the front of a building, and yet it is a wonderful example of the craftsmanship and the artistry that existed in the late 19th century within the Westerly granite industry.
The Westerly Library is our Civil War monument here in Westerly, and it's got some beautiful detail work on the entrance.
Mechanization changed the granite industry in the late 19th century. Electricity was readily available, and what used to be done by man and simple machine was changed forever by technology. New companies, like Sullivan and the Joseph Kadori Company, opened during this time.
What sets Westerly apart from other granites is, one thing is its strength, that you can see that it's a very smooth granite because it's a very fine, very tight grain. So Westerly holds up well in that manner. The other thing that's important about it is the technology of the Smith companies and the companies that were up there, Westerly and New England Granite, had phenomenal craftsmen, but also the developments in technology of how you could turn stone, how you could make these curves. One of the ways that we can always tell Westerly is the raised lettering. It's raised lettering with a curve to it. Where everyone else is cutting block letters, they're doing rounded letters. And that's what really separates Westerly from a lot of the other products. It's color, it's strength of the stone, but it's the technical ability of the carvers that were living there to give you a product that nobody had ever seen.
Monuments were usually produced in pieces, which were then numbered so they could be assembled at their final location. Depending on the era, a different mode of transportation was utilized to transport these finished pieces.
It amazes me that from the 1880s, where transportation and communication were so limited compared to what we're used to now, that Westerly was sending monuments and mausoleums down to Atlanta, Georgia. They would ship either by barge or by rail in those days. Ox carts were used to take the stones down to the railroad station. And in Westerly, the granite quarries are on the top of the hill, so they would hitch up one pair of oxen in front of the cart to steer the cart, and maybe 12 or 13 pair behind the cart to hold it back from running away, going downhill. And then when they'd get to the foot of the hill, then they'd have to reposition the oxen so that they had pullers to take it over to the railroad station.
Westerly's waterways were busy during the Granite era as well, and barges along Margin Street were used in the early days.
One of the practical things that Westerly Granite was used for is cobblestone. Providence, Boston, New York, New Bedford, Fall River, all purchased tons and tons and tons and tons of cobblestone, and they'd be loaded into a barge, and then they would be shipped to the various places.
As transportation evolved, Sullivan Granite and other companies turned to rail power to get the large pieces of stone that were freed from the quarry holes to the sheds and carvers in Westerly and up and down the East Coast.
My grandfather had a rail bed put in because they had well over a mile to go from the quarry to the actual railroad itself. So by putting in a line, they could put it on that and get it to the main railroad.
The end of the Civil War brought with it a desire to commemorate those who fought for freedom. Each state wanted to commemorate their place in history and chose to do it with monuments and statues. This breathtaking monument, known as the Antietam Soldier or the Private Soldier, weighs 250 tons. He is over 21.5 feet tall, is impeccably dressed for the time period, and is made up of 27 pieces. He stands in Sharpsburg, Maryland today, but it's not just his size that matters, but also his journey south that adds to the story.
He was first set up here on Leadwood Avenue for inspection. And we have some pictures of people coming to look at it, and the pictures of the sculptor Carl Conrad looking over the shoulder of the monument. And his final destination was Antietam Cemetery. And somehow in the transfer of the monument from one type of boat to another type of boat, the top half ended up in the Potomac River and spent the winter there until the weather could clear enough so that they could get him out. He's in two pieces, the bottom up to his waist and then waist up. So they eventually got him back together, but he had quite an adventuresome journey to Antietam Battleground.
Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. It is here where the turning point of the Civil War took place. Today, over 70 of the 1,300 Civil War monuments that are found at Gettysburg National Military Park are from Westerly Granite. However, granite was not the first choice of material for many of the original monuments at the park.
When the park was initially established by the Memorial Association, there was marble was a primary monument material, and there was some sandstone that was used in a very short period of time. They found, this would have been the early 1880s, they found deterioration happening. The Memorial Association at that point decided that they would put a moratorium and that everything that was going to be built at Gettysburg, memorial-wise, was going to be done with granite.
It was the quality of the granite, the availability of the stone, and the craftsmen that made Westerly the place to have monuments made.
The Westerly quarries were in the heyday of their operation at the time that this park was being established by the veterans, and that the Berry quarries had not been opened, or it wasn't as prevalent in use, and therefore Westerly is what we see here. The carvings we have here, I think, are some of the nicest in the country. What I see with the Westerly is they're very distinctive in terms of the level of detail. They're basically stone sculpture, and obviously they came off a model and the stone carver then carved the stone, but the amount of detail where they take it to feather edges is just amazing.
The fine grain of Westerly granite made it ideal for cutting and carving, and perfect for creating ornate monuments and statues.
One of the ones that is very dramatic is the Titanic Monument in Washington, D.C. The name of it is called Sacrifice, and it's done by a group of women to honor the sacrifice of the men who went down with the ship so that the women and the children could be saved.
Battlefield monuments can be found in Gettysburg, Chickamauga, and Chattanooga, all made of Westerly granite. Despite the strength of the stone, many of these wondrous works are in need of repair, and those with the knowledge and skill are no longer here.
I think one of the things that we need to do as Americans is make sure that this isn't a lost art. For us to restore and protect these things, we need people who understand the art form, who can replicate pieces that have worn away. It's absolutely crucial at this time, when there are so few people left who know how to do this, that we educate some people so that we can carry this tradition on.
And if the craftsmanship and materials can be found, it comes with a price.
I think the challenge is affordable restoration. We have lots of families that come back to Woodlawn who would love to restore this, and then when they learn the price, it's because there's so few people out there and they are in such demand, they can command a good price, but also just to even get on their schedule. If we had more people who could do this work, we'd see a whole lot more historic preservation in America.
I came to Gettysburg about 4 years ago as the monument supervisor, and it became very apparent to me that there were stone repairs to be made, and that we were going to have to, in preservation, we were replacing materials with in-kind materials. So finding Westerly became sort of a #1 priority of the many #1 priorities before our 150th anniversary.
Repairs to Civil War monuments in Gettysburg National Military Park in Pennsylvania are also proving to be a challenge.
The 11th Massachusetts Volunteers Arm. It was damaged in 2006, a case of vandalism. Someone pulled it from its pedestal and it was broken in half. We had to find a fairly large-sized block of Westerly.
Matching the granite that's needed to make the repairs can be a difficult task, like putting together pieces of a puzzle.
I was able to talk with Bob Denisha, Mr. Camoli, and sort of discuss what options there were for Gettysburg to purchase some of this granite to make this major repair, because it was very symbolic for the park.
And it won't be any easier for future generations.
I think for the next generation, they're going to face the same challenges, because it's still going to be Westerly stone. It's still going to be granite. We're still going to have bronze here, and I think they'll face a lot of the same issues that we have with cleaning, with repairs. The technology isn't changing for stone carving.
Major repairs have recently been made to some of the larger monuments, and others are being repaired before winter sets in.
The Lincoln Speech Monument was showing some severe signs of displacement. It definitely had some stone-on-stone contact, which led to some spalling. It was basically sliding apart, primarily due to freeze-thaw, and they're basically took the whole thing apart, and they're putting the whole thing back together.
Carvers are highly skilled stonecutters. They are artists who work in stone. Joseph Recchia carved close to 60 monuments, including an intricate rose, so beautiful that it was displayed in his home and then mounted on his headstone when he died. Columbus Zurbarini, together with his brother Angelo, made angels come to life. Master carver Richard Comolli is the last of the great carvers of the granite era. He still goes to work at his shop each day. He moves a little slower now, but says he will continue to work with the stone in honor of his father and to keep his craft alive.
I just hope as I went by this way, I kept a few friends and not lost too many, but other than that, if I had to do it over again, I would do the same thing I did. I have no regrets. Life has been good.
He is a man who loves granite. It's his livelihood. You know that this is what he was destined to do, to be this artisan who has done amazingly beautiful work.
The tide was starting to turn in the late 1930s and 1940s. Civil War monuments were no longer being ordered. The financial burdens of the Great Depression and World War II changed everything. The granite industry in Westerly was fading.
We go from these small sort of boutique quarries into massive quarries in Vermont because they can cut massive quantities of stone at one time and transport it out of Vermont. So that's really what is kind of, the downfall of Westerly.
A few quarries did survive long enough to meet some of the new demand after the war, but the once thriving industry was gone.
I think that it ended for several reasons. First of all, there's only so many Civil War battlefields that can hold monuments. The Depression came along. People could not afford to spend the amount of money on individual monuments and tombstones and mausolea and so forth that they had been spending. The Gilded Age ended. World War II came along. And so those young men that had that skill to work in the quarries left to join the war effort, and it was gone.
The stone, of course, still stands as a testament to the workers and talented craftsmen who built these monuments and buildings. It can be found all across the United States, and here in the town of Westerly, Rhode Island, a community carved from stone.